Snowflakes spiraled gently from the overcast sky, brushing against the windshield of Ryan Cole's delivery truck as he pulled into the long, winding drive of the Hart estate. The iron gate creaked behind him, and the gravel crunched softly beneath his tires, muffled by a thin blanket of fresh snow. The house stood at the top of a gentle slope, its gray stones worn by time, windows glowing faintly with warmth that didn't quite match its imposing exterior. Ryan shifted the truck into park and glanced at the passenger seat. Maya, his 7-year-old daughter, was curled up in her puffy pink jacket, headphones in, doodling on a sketch pad balanced on her knees. She looked up just long enough to flash him a grin and a thumbs up. He smiled back before grabbing the 2 paper bags from the front and stepping into the cold. It was his 3rd time delivering to the old mansion, and he already knew the front steps were slick, the doorbell stuck slightly to the right, and that Mrs. Hart would be waiting. She always was. Sure enough, the door opened just as he reached the top step, revealing a petite woman with neatly pinned white hair, a shawl draped around her shoulders, and a cane tucked lightly under her arm. Evelyn Hart had the kind of face that had once commanded rooms, and even now held an elegance most women would envy. Her eyes, sharp and curious, warmed as they landed on him. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice carrying a musical lilt. "Right on time, as always." "Afternoon, ma'am," Ryan said, returning her smile as he handed over the groceries. "Hope you're staying warm up here." "I stay warm enough," she replied, stepping back to let him in. "The furnace roars like a dragon if you prod it just right. Come inside, won't you? No use freezing your eyelashes off." He hesitated for a moment, then stepped into the entryway. The house smelled like lemon polish and lavender tea. Somewhere in the distance, a grandfather clock chimed 3 times. What he didn't see was the black car easing up the driveway behind his truck, or the woman watching him curiously from behind tinted glass as she took in the scene, her expression unreadable. Ryan Cole never planned on delivering groceries for a living. Once upon a time, he had grease on his hands and a wrench in his back pocket, managing repairs at the town's busiest auto shop. He used to pride himself on diagnosing an engine's trouble by the sound alone, a talent passed down from his father, but that was before everything unraveled. Before he buried his wife, before the bills multiplied faster than his grief could shrink, before the mortgage companies stopped being polite and started using legal phrases. Now, he drove for a local delivery service, part of a pilot program meant to support the town's aging population. The pay wasn't great, but the hours were flexible, and more importantly, he could keep Maya close. Most days, she rode shotgun with her tablet and snacks, coloring quietly or reading from whatever library book she'd picked that week. On warmer afternoons, she'd come along to the doors, charming customers with her big brown eyes and missing front tooth. But on days like this one, when the sky threatened sleet and the air felt like frozen cloth, she stayed tucked inside the truck under a fleece blanket, safe and warm. Ryan didn't mind the work. It was honest. He liked the rhythm of driving, the brief interactions at each door, the way his customers lit up at a friendly smile and a reliable delivery. He knew the names of their pets, how they liked their eggs, whether they preferred paper or plastic. He especially liked delivering to Mrs. Hart. She had an old-school grace about her, and a quiet loneliness that reminded him of his own mother, who had passed just months after Maya was born. There was something grounding about the way she always greeted him like an old friend, never like a hired hand. It wasn't easy raising a daughter on his own, especially without much of a safety net. His brother was stationed overseas, and his in-laws had moved down south after his wife passed. He had neighbors who checked in sometimes, and Maya's teacher often sent extra reading materials home, knowing how much the little girl loved books. But most days, it was just the 2 of them. He packed her lunch, braided her hair the best he could, and read bedtime stories even when he was too tired to keep his eyes open. He missed his wife every day. She had been the organized one, the calm presence in their house, the glue that kept everything from falling apart. Cancer took her in a matter of months. One day they were planning a weekend picnic, and not long after, Ryan was learning how to tie ribbons into Maya's braids while pretending his world wasn't crumbling. Still, life went on. Maya needed him to be present, and he tried. He cooked simple meals, made silly voices during story time, and laughed with her even when the bills sat unopened on the counter. His dreams had shifted. He used to want to run his own auto shop. Now he dreamed of saving enough to buy a modest home with a fenced-in yard and a second-hand trampoline. He dreamed of Maya growing up, knowing she was safe, loved, and never in danger of losing everything again. As he stepped deeper into Mrs. Hart's foyer, wiping the slush from his boots on the welcome mat, Ryan didn't know that today would mark the beginning of something he'd stopped believing was possible. Not just a better job or a stroke of luck, but the kind of shift that reshapes the entire course of a man's life. Mrs. Evelyn Hart moved slowly, but there was nothing uncertain about the way she carried herself. Her cane tapped rhythmically against the polished floor as she led Ryan into the kitchen, her shoulders straight and her chin lifted. The walls were lined with oil paintings and faded portraits, the kind that suggested generations of wealth and formality, though the air inside the house felt more lived in than pretentious. A faint scent of vanilla and rosewater lingered, wrapped around the aroma of something warm in the oven. "You're in luck," she said as she gestured toward the table. "The lemon bars came out better this time. I followed the directions instead of assuming I knew better, which is a rare concession, mind you." Ryan smiled as he set the grocery bags on the counter. "I never turned down a lemon bar, ma'am. You sure I'm not imposing?" Evelyn waved off the concern and busied herself unloading the bags. She didn't let him help. She never did. It seemed important to her to remain capable, even as her hands moved more slowly than they once had. Her fingers trembled just slightly when she reached for the milk carton, and Ryan quietly turned his attention elsewhere so she could keep her dignity intact. "You know, when I first started using this service, I expected grunting boys with little sense and less punctuality," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Instead, I got you." "Lucky you," Ryan said, trying not to laugh. "I don't grunt unless I've skipped coffee." "Don't get too confident," she replied, smiling. "I haven't decided if you're exceptional or just decent by comparison." Evelyn reminded him of his grandmother, though she had more edge than sweetness. There was sharpness in her observations, a dry humor that didn't always announce itself, but under that wit was kindness. He'd seen it in the way she kept extra snacks for Maya, the way she asked about his week without making it sound like charity. She seemed to understand how to make people feel seen without prying too hard. The two of them chatted while she arranged her groceries. Ryan told her about Maya's new fascination with constellations and how she'd insisted on sleeping with a flashlight so she could hunt stars on the ceiling. Evelyn chuckled and said the child had a better imagination than most adults she knew. He noticed she paused more often now, resting one hand against the countertop while pretending to read labels more carefully than necessary. "You ever think about retiring somewhere warm?" he asked, watching her movements with quiet concern. Evelyn looked out the window, where the snow had begun to fall heavier. "I like the cold. It keeps your senses sharp. Besides, memories don't follow you just because the weather's better." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. She handed him a warm lemon bar wrapped in wax paper, and he thanked her with the same sincerity he used when tucking his daughter in at night. Outside, the black car still sat at the end of the drive, unnoticed, its occupant waiting. Ryan was halfway down the front steps when he saw the black car idling at the bottom of the drive. It hadn't been there when he arrived. The engine was still running, breath visible in white puffs from the tailpipe, and a sleek-looking driver stood beside it, glancing at his phone. Ryan didn't think much of it at first. Evelyn's family probably visited from time to time, though she rarely spoke about them. He adjusted his grip on the empty delivery bag and jogged the last few steps to the truck, opening the door just enough to check on Maya. She was still sketching, now drawing what looked like a princess with stars in her hair. When he turned to climb into the cab, The sound of heels on gravel caught his attention. He looked back and saw her tall, poised, and wrapped in a long black coat that moved like fabric from another world. Her chestnut hair was swept into a loose knot at the base of her neck, and her skin was pale in the winter light. The woman was walking toward the house without hurry, her eyes locked on the door he'd just exited. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of calculation and concern. She looked at him only once, a brief flick of her eyes as she passed, and it was the kind of look that made a man straighten his spine. Not hostile, but guarded. Not friendly, either. She said nothing, just gave the door a quick knock and let herself in without waiting for an answer. Ryan lingered a second longer, his hand still resting on the truck's door handle. Something about her unsettled him, though he couldn't have said why. He shrugged it off and climbed into the cab. Inside, Evelyn had just finished putting away the last of the canned goods when her granddaughter stepped into the kitchen. Charlotte didn't remove her coat. She stood near the doorway like someone preparing to critique a room. "Gran," she said, eyes scanning the space. "You really shouldn't be lifting those. I told you I could send someone." Evelyn smiled and didn't stop wiping the counter. "I have someone, thank you. You just missed him." Charlotte's gaze narrowed slightly. "The delivery man. You let him inside?" "He's kind," Evelyn replied, tapping the cloth against the sink edge. "And helpful. And no, I didn't hand him the family silver." Charlotte walked over to the fridge, opening it with a sigh. She didn't like what she saw there either, judging by the way her brow creased. "I could have had all this brought from the city. You don't need to keep using some random driver." Evelyn turned to her, folding the cloth. "His name is Ryan Cole. He's polite, on time, and doesn't treat me like a fragile box someone left on a doorstep. I like that." Charlotte bit the inside of her cheek, then let out a breath. "All right." Out in the truck, Ryan sat watching the house a moment longer, his gut still uneasy. Something about the granddaughter's glance had made him feel like he didn't belong there, like he'd wandered too close to something private. He started the engine, watching as snow began to settle on the windshield. Maya looked up from her drawing. "Was she nice?" she asked. He thought for a second before answering. "Not sure yet." Back in the kitchen, Charlotte poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. "You trust people too easily, Gran." Evelyn smiled, her eyes twinkling just a little. "You trust them too late." Charlotte didn't leave town the next day. Her business meetings got rescheduled, or maybe she had delayed them herself, but Evelyn didn't ask. The Hart estate, quiet for years, suddenly felt alive with the click of laptop keys and the occasional murmur of conference calls drifting down the halls. Charlotte took over the upstairs office and had groceries delivered from a specialty store in the city, but Evelyn still insisted on her regular deliveries. And Ryan kept coming. The second time Charlotte saw him, it was at the local pharmacy. He was balancing a bag of prescriptions in one arm and holding Maya's hand with the other. Maya wore a puffy red coat and mismatched mittens, her smile wide as she tugged him toward the toy aisle. Charlotte had come in for vitamins and left with a lingering glance she couldn't explain. She saw them again the following week, this time outside the library. Ryan was helping Maya zip her coat while she clutched a stack of books nearly half her size. He looked up and met Charlotte's gaze across the parking lot, offering a brief nod. She returned it, stiffly, then got into her car and watched them from behind the wheel longer than she meant to. It happened like that unexpected meetings around town, fragments of his life brushing against hers. The tension between them was subtle but constant, like static before a storm. She couldn't quite place her discomfort. It wasn't dislike. If anything, it was curiosity mixed with something warmer, something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. One morning, she came downstairs to find Ryan standing in the entryway with Evelyn, holding a flat tire from her ancient garden cart. His hands were smudged with grease, and he was laughing at something Evelyn had said. When he noticed Charlotte watching, he straightened a little, nodding politely. "Morning," he said. "Did she bribe you into handyman work with lemon bars?" Charlotte asked, arms crossed. She offered, but I did this one for free. She raised an eyebrow. You should have held out for 2 lemon bars. Ryan grinned. Next time. Evelyn watched them from the hall mirror, saying nothing. Later that day, Charlotte wandered into the kitchen while Evelyn was stirring soup. She leaned against the counter, casually swirling her tea. He seems nice, Charlotte said. Evelyn didn't look up. He is. Charlotte hesitated, then added, He seems like the kind of man who could get hurt. Evelyn stirred slower, then turned the burner to low. He's been hurt. That's why he's careful. Charlotte said nothing more, but she thought about it for the rest of the night. One Saturday, Evelyn invited them both to stay for lunch. Maya chatted animatedly about constellations while Charlotte set extra plates, trying not to overthink the way Ryan's eyes crinkled when he laughed. The meal was simple sandwiches, soup, and slices of fresh pear, but it felt more full than any catered spread Charlotte had eaten in years. After they finished, Charlotte found herself walking Ryan and Maya to their truck. Maya skipped ahead to climb into the cab, and Charlotte stood by the driver's side door, arms folded. You two are close, she said. Ryan looked at his daughter, then nodded. We're a team. I never had that. With my parents, I mean. My mother was always away, and my father thought affection was a form of weakness. I'm sorry, Ryan said genuinely. That's a hard way to grow up. Charlotte shrugged, brushing a curl from her cheek. It teaches you to take care of yourself, to build something that doesn't need anyone else. But it gets lonely, Ryan said, and she looked at him, startled by the gentleness in his voice. Yeah, she admitted. Sometimes. They stood like that for a moment, the cold forgotten. Then Maya tapped on the window, waving a drawing she'd made. Charlotte leaned closer and saw that it was of the 3 of them herself, Ryan, and Maya drawn, in bright crayon colors, standing beneath a sky full of stars. Ryan looked embarrassed. She does that sometimes. Charlotte smiled and tapped the window back. She's a good artist. As he opened the truck door, she reached out and touched his arm. He paused, eyes meeting hers. Whatever she meant to say stayed in her throat, and instead she just gave a soft smile and let her hand fall. Back inside, Evelyn watched from the parlor window, sipping her tea, her expression one of quiet satisfaction. She didn't say anything when Charlotte returned to the kitchen, cheeks slightly flushed. She didn't need to. Whatever was beginning between them had no name yet, but it had weight and warmth and the faint outline of something real. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of overcast day that made the air feel heavy even before anything went wrong. Ryan arrived at the Hart estate just after noon with Evelyn's groceries, only to find Charlotte waiting on the porch. She was holding 2 coffees and wearing a look that was too carefully neutral to be casual. I thought we could talk, she said, handing him a cup before he had a chance to protest. Just for a few minutes. He followed her around to the back garden, where the snow had started to melt, revealing patches of dormant grass. The bench beneath the oak tree was dry, and they sat without speaking for a moment, steam rising from their cups. I've been thinking, she began, not looking at him, about what you told me, about your dream of owning your own place again, the shop you mentioned. Ryan stayed quiet, but the shift in his shoulders was unmistakable. I want to help, she continued. I've looked into some things, and there are ways to do it without strings. A grant, an investment. You wouldn't owe me anything personal. It's just potential, and you deserve that. The silence stretched too long. Charlotte glanced at him, expecting surprise or at least curiosity, but what she saw instead was a tension she hadn't anticipated. You want to fund my life now? Ryan's voice was calm but tight. Is that what this is? She blinked. No, that's not what I said. It's what it feels like, he replied, standing now, coffee forgotten on the bench. I'm not some project you can write a check over. I've been figuring things out on my own. Maybe it's slow, but it's mine. Charlotte rose, her tone cooling. It's not about control. It's about opportunity. For who? He asked. You, trying to ease your guilt? Or me, trying not to offend someone with a black card and a savior complex. The words landed harder than he intended, but once spoken, he couldn't take them back. Charlotte's expression shuddered. She stepped away, jaw tightening. "I thought we were past the part where we made assumptions," she said quietly. Ryan ran a hand over his face. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that." "But you did," she replied. "And that's the part that hurts." She walked back toward the house, each step deliberate. Ryan stayed under the oak tree until the cold crept into his boots and the coffee at his feet had gone lukewarm. The next few days passed without any contact. He still delivered to Evelyn, but Charlotte was never there. Maya asked why Miss Charlotte hadn't come out to say hello, and Ryan gave vague answers about busy schedules and meetings. He could feel the absence like a draft through a cracked window. Then Evelyn fell ill. It wasn't sudden, not really. But when she fainted in the kitchen one morning, everything else fell away. Ryan was the one who found her, having arrived early to drop off a forgotten order. He called the ambulance, rode with her to the hospital, and stayed long after visiting hours were over. Charlotte arrived hours later, breathless and pale, her voice tight with fear. They didn't speak much that night, just traded updates and watched Evelyn sleep, the machines humming around her. When Ryan stepped into the hallway to call Maya, Charlotte followed. "You didn't have to stay," she said softly. "She did," he answered. "She always made time for me and Maya. This is the least I can do." Charlotte looked at him then, really looked. She saw the exhaustion in his face, the worry in his eyes, and something else. Something more tender than pride, deeper than fear. "I wasn't trying to insult you," she said, voice cracking just a little. "I just wanted to believe I could do some good for once, and not ruin it." Ryan nodded, the edge gone from his posture now. "I know." They stood there in silence, not quite healed, but not broken either, just waiting, side by side, for whatever came next. Evelyn returned home after 5 days in the hospital, tired but still herself. The doctors called it a warning sign, something to monitor closely. She called it an inconvenience. Charlotte insisted on moving into the guest room for a while, and Ryan dropped off groceries daily without being asked. They both danced around each other, careful with their words, but the air between them had changed. One quiet evening, after Maya had fallen asleep in the truck with her head against the window, Ryan found Charlotte alone on the porch, wrapped in a quilt with a book in her lap. She looked up as he approached, but didn't speak right away. The wind whispered through the bare trees, and the last of the daylight painted soft lines across her face. "I've been thinking about that night," he said, hands in his pockets. Charlotte nodded slowly. "So have I. I was unfair to you. I let my pride get in the way. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about feeling small in front of you, and that's not your fault." She closed the book gently, fingers resting on the cover. "I never meant to make you feel that way." "I know," he said. "I just didn't know how to let someone help without feeling like I was giving something up." "You weren't," she said. "You never had to prove anything to me. I saw you. From the first time I saw you with Maya, I knew you were someone who gives everything he has, even when it hurts." He took a step closer, uncertain at first, then sure. "I want a better life for her. I want to stop surviving and start building again. But I think part of me was afraid that letting someone in meant risking more loss." Charlotte reached for his hand, and when their fingers touched, it felt less like surrender and more like something earned. "Then let it be a partnership," she said. "You're not alone in this." He nodded, the weight in his chest lifting. "I don't want your money, but I'd be proud to build something with you, something that belongs to both of us." She smiled, small and real. "That sounds like a beginning." Evelyn watched them from the parlor window, her tea untouched. She didn't need to hear their words to know what they meant. The way their shoulders leaned in, the way Ryan's hands stayed clasped in Charlotte's, told her everything. Later that night, as Ryan carried Maya inside to tuck her into Evelyn's guest room, Charlotte followed with a blanket. They met in the hallway, and in that quiet moment, she reached up and pressed her lips gently to his. It wasn't a kiss of passion or promise. It was one of understanding. A soft, simple yes. In the days that followed, they began drafting a plan for the shop. Charlotte handled the paperwork and the permits. Ryan talked to vendors and laid out his vision. Evelyn remained their anchor, offering quiet advice from her favorite chair, a blanket over her knees, and a knowing smile on her face. The future still held its questions, but now there were two hearts asking them together, and one little girl who never stopped drawing pictures of their new life. A year later, the garage sat on the edge of town, freshly painted and buzzing with life. The sign above the door read, "Cole, Hart Auto," and beneath it hung a small wooden carving of stars that Maya had made herself. Customers came in for oil changes and left with fresh-baked cookies from the counter inside. The waiting room smelled faintly of lemon and coffee. A photo of Evelyn sat near the register, smiling behind a plate of her famous bars. Ryan stood at the front bay, wiping his hands on a rag as Charlotte pulled up in her car. She stepped out in jeans and a white blouse, her hair pulled back and her eyes already searching for him. Maya ran out from inside, arms wide, and Charlotte scooped her up effortlessly, laughing as the little girl buried her face in her shoulder. They had built this place together, slowly, piece by piece. Ryan handled the repairs and the customers, Charlotte the books and community outreach. She turned out to be a natural at small-town life, surprising them both. People trusted her because she listened. She smiled more now. So did he. They ate dinner together most nights at the house Evelyn once ruled with quiet grace. Now it echoed with laughter and the shuffle of slippers on hardwood. Evelyn still joined them when she felt strong enough, watching over them with the same steady calm that had drawn them all together. One evening, as they finished washing dishes, Maya reached for Charlotte's hand and called her mom for the first time. It was quiet, nearly whispered, but it froze the room. Charlotte turned to Ryan, eyes wide, and he simply nodded. There was no ceremony, just a full heart and a beginning that finally felt complete.